Welcome to part 2 of my Wobbly world. Next, I'd like to discuss briefly some of the things that are going on in the context of the crisis. It's well enough known in the United States, $700 billion as a bank bailout or perhaps buy-in. In Germany alone, 500 billion euros, and so on. The numbers go on and on. Now, the way to interpret this money, why the heck is that much money being spent all of a sudden? It's often commented with bitterness, why isn't it being spent on health insurance for poor people or on their mortgages? Why isn't it being spent on renewable energy, so on? Well, the explanation is quite simple. This is ransom that we're paying to the 2% so that they do not repeat their performance from 1929, namely to destroy half of the jobs on Earth and to unleash at least one Hitler and perhaps a couple of Mussolinis on us. Whether they honor the agreement about the ransom remains to be seen, of course. Now, please note that so far no neoliberal economist and no one else has really dared to step up in the public and to say, well, the cause of the crisis is wages, salaries, pensions, etc. that are too high. Even these people are not making that claim, so keep that in mind and also consider that actually, if you go one step beyond the normal news coverage of the subprime mortgage crisis, you realize that the problem of the mortgage holders was either that their mortgage was too high or perhaps that their wages were too low. All this means simply that if you make concessions to your boss to work for less money or to work more for the same money, etc., all you're doing is you're endangering your own job that much more. So you're well advised to resist as best you can, as always, these advances from your boss. Naturally, it's clear that you and I are going to be paying for those many billions, in fact trillions, in ransom money. Those who are working in the private sector will pay through lower public services with higher taxes. Those who are working in the public sector will, of course, be asked and pressed to work more for the same money or even work more for less money. It's interesting to note that in Germany, for an example, they've already come up with measures where they say that the managers of banks that take advantage of the rescue bailout package will have to have their salaries limited to €500,000 per annum. And there are similar things going on in the Netherlands and perhaps elsewhere. Well, that's a good start. However, I think it would be appropriate to go a heck of a lot further than the Christian Democrats are going. This is a measure that really needs to be generalized, so on. And I'd like to point out the resources of planet Earth are finite. And that means that if someone categorically argues against all limits on income and wealth, that person is also, by exactly the same token, arguing for no limits on inequality and no limits on poverty. Because the loaf of bread, the cake, cannot be infinitely extended. So because of that reason, limits on wealth and income are perfectly logical, and in fact, among other things, they're an ethical imperative. There is, however, an even more important reason for limiting people's income and wealth in a sensible way, let us say. Namely, look, most of the civilized world agrees that weapons ownership for private citizens needs to be regulated or perhaps even banned. And this is, of course, because a man with a .45 caliber pistol is a lot more powerful than an unarmed person would be. Now, suppose there is a dispute between one citizen who has 0 in the bank and another citizen who has 45 million euros or dollars in the bank, even if that person doesn't have a .45 caliber pistol. Now, you know perfectly well that there's no equality at all. And this is the deeper reason why we have to try to cap wealth. You shouldn't, however, take too seriously the public squabbling about just how far so-called nationalization or so-called re-regulation goes. This is very largely a power struggle between different parts of the 2 richest percent. There's a group among them that is directly and simply financial, and there's also a group that is more political. And of course, during the last 30 years, it's the money group that has been gaining power at the expense of the political group. And now the political group is taking back some of that power. Well, what's wrong with the current banking system, where something like 50% perhaps of the human race has deposited at least small amounts of money, is of course that they take the money and they go and they do something. They might invest it in the production of mosquito nets to save people from malaria in Africa, but they might also invest it in the production of landmines and small arms to kill people in Africa. And you, who have deposited your money in an account or bought a financial product from a bank, you have no idea what's going on, and therefore, of course, you have no control and no responsibility. We need to change that to a system where everyone who owns a slice of a business, no matter how tiny the slice might be, gets a proportional share in the control of that business. And nowadays, with the internet and with email, that is not too difficult to realize. Yeah. Okay. This is the end of part 2.